Mark Winters leaned back in his leather chair, a contented smile on his face as he surveyed the polished showroom of Winters Auto. The floor gleamed under the bright lights, reflecting the immaculate rows of luxury cars that showcased his success. As the owner of one of the most renowned car dealerships in the city, Mark had built his empire from the ground up. Each vehicle on display was a testament to his hard work and dedication. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and the golden light streaming through the large windows cast a warm glow across the showroom. The usual hum of activity was punctuated by the occasional sound of footsteps or the distant chime of the doorbell. Mark's thoughts wandered to the evening's charity gala, a high-profile event he had eagerly anticipated for weeks. He imagined the lavish affair, the clinking of glasses, and the soft murmur of elite conversations. Life was good, he mused, as he prepared for another successful day. The tranquility of the afternoon was abruptly shattered by the sudden clang of the showroom's front door slamming open. Startled, Mark looked up from his desk to see a disheveled figure stumbling into the showroom. The man's clothes were ragged, and his unkempt hair fell over his face, obscuring his features. The contrast between this man and the opulence of the showroom could not have been more stark. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The few customers in the showroom paused, casting curious glances at the intruder. Mark's initial reaction was one of irritation. Who was this person, and why had he dared to interrupt his carefully curated environment? The man took a few hesitant steps inside, his eyes scanning the rows of gleaming vehicles with a mixture of awe and confusion. Mark's irritation was quickly replaced by a sense of unease. He straightened his tie and walked toward the stranger, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. "Can I help you?" Mark's voice was firm, though a trace of concern edged his tone. The man looked up, revealing a weathered face marked by lines of hardship. His eyes, though tired, held a spark of hope. I didn't mean to intrude," the man stammered. "I'm just looking for some help. I'm Jack." Mark studied Jack, noting the dirt-streaked face and the forlorn expression. The man's presence was an incongruous sight against the backdrop of luxury and success. Mark's first instinct was to dismiss him, to send him away with a curt apology. Yet something in Jack's demeanor gave Mark pause. "All right, Jack," Mark said, his voice softening slightly. "What kind of help are you looking for?" Jack shifted nervously, glancing around as if unsure of how to ask for what he needed. I'm just looking for a meal. Maybe some work if there's anything available. I've been on the streets for a while." Mark's gaze softened. This was not the type of encounter he had planned for the day, but the sincerity in Jack's voice tugged at something deep within him. He glanced at the pristine cars and then back at Jack, who stood before him with a look of quiet desperation. "Let's talk in my office," Mark said, motioning toward the glass door leading to his private quarters. Jack hesitated for a moment before nodding gratefully and following Mark. As they walked through the showroom, the sound of Jack's footsteps seemed to reverberate through the space, mingling with the soft hum of the showroom lights. Mark's mind raced, contemplating the unexpected turn of events. He had always seen his dealership as a symbol of his success, a reflection of his hard work and ambition. Now, as he led Jack toward his office, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was about to change something fundamental. Mark closed the office door behind them, shutting out the world of luxury and success that lay just beyond. He motioned for Jack to sit across from him, settling into his own chair with a thoughtful expression. The room was filled with the rich aroma of polished wood and the faint scent of leather from the chairs. Jack sat down, his posture still tense. "Thank you for seeing me," he said quietly. Mark studied Jack for a moment, trying to read the man's story in his worn-out face. "I'm not sure what I can offer," Mark began, "but let's start by hearing more about your situation." As Jack began to share his story, Mark listened intently, the echoes of his successful life beginning to blur with the harsh reality Jack presented. The conversation was just beginning, and Mark could feel the undercurrent of change weaving its way into his well-ordered world. As Mark settled into the leather chair behind his desk, he watched Jack shift uncomfortably in the opposite seat. The office, with its polished wood and soft lighting, seemed to offer a stark contrast to the hardship etched into Jack's face. The room was quiet, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur of traffic outside. "Let's start from the beginning," Mark said, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. Jack looked up, meeting Mark's gaze with eyes that betrayed a blend of hope and weariness. "It's been a rough few months," Jack began, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "I lost my job and then my apartment. I never thought I'd end up on the streets, but here I am." Mark's brow furrowed. The man's story was more than just a series of unfortunate events. It was a testament to a struggle that Mark had rarely, if ever, encountered firsthand. As Jack continued, describing nights spent in shelters and days of wandering the city, Mark's initial discomfort began to dissolve into something more profound: empathy. Jack paused, looking around the office with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "I saw the job ad in the newspaper. It said you were hiring, and I thought maybe this could be a chance to get back on my feet." Mark nodded, his mind racing. The polished desk before him, the sleek cars in the showroom, all symbols of his success, now felt distant and almost irrelevant. Here was Jack, a man in need, standing in stark contrast to the world Mark had built around him. "I can't offer much right now," Mark said, his voice softer than before, "but we might be able to work something out. Maybe a temporary position, just to get you started." Jack's eyes lit up with gratitude. "Thank you. I appreciate any chance you can give me." Mark leaned back in his chair, the hum of the air conditioning punctuating the silence as he considered his next steps. "Let's see what we can do. I can offer you some work around the dealership. It might not be glamorous, but it'll be something." As they spoke, Mark's thoughts drifted to his upcoming charity gala. The event had been planned meticulously, a showcase of his success and generosity. Yet here he was, faced with a reality that no amount of charity balls or high-profile donations could compare to. It was a direct encounter with a need he hadn't fully acknowledged before. Jack's presence in the office began to shift something within Mark. The man's story and his hopeful demeanor were slowly chipping away at the carefully constructed barriers Mark had built around his life. The realization struck him that this was more than just a temporary inconvenience or a fleeting charity project. It was an opportunity for genuine change. "Why don't you start tomorrow?" Mark suggested, trying to sound casual but feeling the weight of his decision. "I'll have someone show you the ropes." Jack stood, his gratitude palpable. "Thank you so much. I won't let you down." As Jack left the office, Mark watched him go, the door closing with a soft click behind him. The hum of the air conditioning seemed to grow louder, filling the space that now felt strangely empty. Mark sat alone, his thoughts consumed by the encounter. The world outside his office, the gleaming showroom, the upcoming gala, felt suddenly distant, as if he were seeing it through a new lens. He glanced around his office, taking in the framed awards and photos of high-profile events. The reflections of his success, once so vivid, now seemed tinged with a new perspective. Mark was left contemplating the juxtaposition of his comfortable existence against the raw reality that Jack represented. The next day arrived with a flurry of activity, but Mark's mind was preoccupied with the upcoming changes. The usual hustle of the dealership took on a different meaning. Every car that gleamed under the showroom lights, every deal that was discussed, now seemed part of a broader narrative, one that included Jack and the transformation that was just beginning. As Mark prepared for the day, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the start of something much larger. The upcoming charity gala felt less significant compared to the personal journey unfolding right in his own office. It was as if, in helping Jack, Mark had embarked on a path of discovery that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself and his world. The morning light filtered through the large windows of Winters Auto, casting a warm glow on the showroom floor. Mark Winters stood by his desk, reviewing the day's schedule, his thoughts drifting back to his conversation with Jack. He felt a mix of anticipation and unease as he prepared for the man's first day of work. Jack arrived promptly, wearing clothes that were slightly cleaner than before but still bore the marks of hardship. His demeanor was a mix of nervous excitement and restrained hope. Mark greeted him with a nod and motioned toward the workshop area. "Morning, Jack. I'll have Mike show you around and get you settled in." "Just follow his lead," Mark said, trying to sound casual but feeling a weight of responsibility. Mike, a seasoned employee with a skeptical eye, greeted Jack with a wary glance. "This is where you'll be working. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work." Jack nodded, taking in his new surroundings. The dimly lit garage filled with tools and car parts, the faint smell of grease and gasoline hanging in the air. He began his tasks with a quiet determination, his movements careful and deliberate. As the day wore on, Mark watched from a distance, noting how Jack struggled with some of the tasks. The man was slow and occasionally clumsy, but his eagerness to learn was evident. Mark found himself growing increasingly invested in Jack's progress, aware that this was more than just a temporary job placement. It was a test of both Jack's resilience and Mark's own commitment to helping him. By lunchtime, Jack had managed to complete several tasks, though the results were far from perfect. Mark sat in his office, reviewing some paperwork, when he heard the distinct sounds of Jack's work: metal clanging, muffled grunts, and the occasional soft curse. During a brief lull, Mark decided to check on Jack. He found him hunched over a car engine, his hands smeared with oil. Despite the hard work, there was a look of quiet satisfaction on Jack's face. "How's it going?" Mark asked, trying to gauge the situation. Jack looked up, sweat trickling down his forehead. "It's tougher than I expected, but I'm managing. Thanks for giving me this chance." Mark nodded, offering a reassuring smile. "Keep at it. You're doing fine." As the afternoon progressed, Mark began to notice subtle changes in the dealership. Some of the staff members cast curious glances at Jack, whispering among themselves. The usually polished atmosphere of the showroom felt slightly off, a reminder of the new dynamic Jack's presence introduced. One of Mark's top sales associates, Linda, approached him with a concerned look. "Mark, is there a reason we've got someone like that working here? The place doesn't feel the same." Mark met her gaze, feeling a pang of discomfort. "I'm giving him a chance. He's doing his best, and I believe it's worth the effort." Linda sighed but didn't press further. The atmosphere in the dealership was subtly shifting, and Mark couldn't ignore the growing unease among his staff. He had anticipated some resistance, but the reality of it was more palpable than he had imagined. As the day drew to a close, Jack's work was far from flawless, but there was a noticeable improvement in his efficiency. Mark appreciated the effort, though the results were not yet up to the dealership's high standards. The tension among the staff was a constant undercurrent, and Mark found himself in a balancing act, juggling the needs of his business with his commitment to helping Jack. That evening, as Mark prepared for the charity gala, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The gala, a symbol of his success and philanthropy, seemed to pale in comparison to the personal challenges unfolding at his dealership. He dressed in his tuxedo, the sleek fabric contrasting sharply with the messy reality of Jack's work. In the quiet moments before the event, Mark reflected on the day's events. The discomfort among his staff, the imperfect results of Jack's work, these were the tangible consequences of his decision. He had stepped out of his comfort zone, but the path forward was fraught with challenges. As Mark arrived at the gala, the opulence of the event was a stark contrast to the world he had left behind at the dealership. The room was filled with the clinking of glasses, the soft murmur of high-profile conversations, and the shimmering elegance of the evening's decor. Yet, despite the glamour and success surrounding him, Mark's thoughts remained with Jack and the impact of his decision. The evening was a blur of speeches, handshakes, and carefully curated smiles. Mark found himself distracted, his mind wandering back to the challenges he faced and the changes he had set in motion. The grandeur of the gala seemed distant, overshadowed by the real-life consequences of his actions. As the event drew to a close, Mark's thoughts were consumed by the future. The road ahead was uncertain, and the consequences of his choices were becoming increasingly evident. The unexpected encounter with Jack had set in motion a series of events that would challenge Mark's perceptions and redefine his understanding of success and empathy. The crisp morning air greeted Mark as he arrived at Winters Auto, his thoughts heavy from the gala's distractions. The polished showroom that once embodied his success now seemed like a backdrop to the ongoing challenges. The sounds of the city outside were muffled, giving way to the low hum of activity within the dealership. Mark's routine was interrupted by a phone call from Linda. "Mark, you might want to come to the back. There's something you need to see." A sense of urgency laced her voice, compelling Mark to hurry to the workshop area. As he walked, he mentally reviewed the tasks awaiting him: inventory checks, client meetings, and Jack's progress. His thoughts were jolted back to the present when he saw Linda standing near the garage entrance, her face a mix of concern and curiosity. "What's going on?" Mark asked, his brow furrowed. Linda pointed to a cluttered workbench where Jack was busy with a car engine. Jack's movements were frenetic, and his face was flushed with concentration. But it wasn't just the disarray of tools and parts that caught Mark's attention. It was the stack of documents Jack had carelessly scattered over the bench. "Look at these," Linda said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They don't seem like regular paperwork." Mark glanced at the papers. They were old, yellowed with age, and covered in scribbles and notes. He picked up one of the documents, his eyes scanning the faded ink. The content was cryptic, referring to financial transactions, contracts, and names he didn't recognize. Jack looked up, his face going pale as he noticed Mark's scrutiny. "Oh, those. Where did you find these?" Mark interrupted, trying to keep his voice steady. The documents had an air of secrecy, and their presence in the workshop felt like an intrusion into a hidden world. Jack hesitated, his eyes darting nervously. "I didn't know they were there. I was just cleaning up and came across them. I thought they might be important." Mark's mind raced. The documents hinted at something more significant, something that reached beyond the surface of Jack's current predicament. "These don't look like they belong here," Mark said, more to himself than to Jack. "What do they mean?" Jack took a deep breath, his voice trembling. "I didn't want to say anything, but those papers are part of a case I was involved in a long time ago. I used to work in finance before everything fell apart. I think they might be linked to something bigger." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Mark's curiosity piqued. He realized there was a deeper connection between Jack's past and the present circumstances. He gestured for Jack to sit down and began to sift through the papers, his mind racing to piece together the puzzle. As Mark examined the documents, he came across a series of names and numbers that appeared to be connected to various financial dealings. Some names were familiar, associated with influential figures in the city, while others were obscure but seemed significant in their own right. "This looks like a trail of some sort," Mark mused aloud. "If these papers are connected to your past, then there's more to the story than we've uncovered so far." Jack's face was a mixture of fear and resignation. "I didn't want to get into this. I was trying to leave that part of my life behind. But if these documents are here, it means there's something more that I need to address." Mark's thoughts were a whirlwind of speculation and concern. The documents could be a link to a past scandal, a financial fraud, or something entirely different. The implications were far-reaching, and the stakes were suddenly much higher. "I need to know more," Mark said decisively. "This could be important. If there's something in these papers that could affect the dealership or my reputation, we need to address it." Jack nodded, his expression filled with a mix of fear and relief. "I understand. I'll tell you everything I know. But please, let's handle this carefully." As they began to unravel the mystery, Mark's mind was preoccupied with the revelations. The documents seemed to reveal a world of hidden connections and potential conflicts that extended far beyond the dealership. It became clear that Jack's presence at Winters Auto was not just a matter of offering help. It was intertwined with a larger narrative that needed to be explored. The day passed in a haze of discovery and investigation. Mark and Jack worked together, piecing together the information and seeking out additional details. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on Mark, shifting his perspective from mere curiosity to a deep sense of responsibility. By evening, Mark was exhausted but determined. The dealership, once a symbol of his success, now felt like the epicenter of a complex web of secrets and revelations. As he prepared to leave, his thoughts were consumed by the next steps in uncovering the truth and navigating the consequences of the unfolding story. The early morning sunlight filtered through the dealership's windows, casting long shadows on the showroom floor. Mark Winters was already at his desk, a stack of documents and financial reports spread out before him. His focus was fractured, his mind preoccupied with the implications of the secrets uncovered the previous day. The dealership had become a battleground of competing priorities and mounting challenges. Mark's attention was drawn to the gentle buzz of his office phone. It was Linda, her voice tinged with urgency. "Mark, we need to talk. There's been a development with Jack." A knot tightened in Mark's stomach. "I'll be right there." He made his way to the workshop area, where Jack was already at work. The usual clatter of tools and machinery was accompanied by a tense atmosphere. Jack looked up, his face etched with concern. "Everything okay?" Mark asked, his tone laced with concern. Jack wiped his hands on a rag and took a deep breath. "I've been having trouble focusing on my tasks. There's something going on with the documents. It's like they've triggered something. I've been getting strange phone calls and messages." Mark's eyes widened. "Strange phone calls? From who?" Jack hesitated before pulling out his phone and showing Mark a series of texts. The messages were cryptic and threatening, hinting at dangers if Jack didn't keep quiet. The implication was clear. Someone wanted to keep these secrets buried. "This is more serious than I thought," Mark said, his voice low. "We need to be careful." Linda, who had followed Mark, looked worried. "Mark, we've been hearing rumors among the staff. Some people are saying there's trouble brewing. They're not happy about Jack working here." Mark's mind raced. The tension among the staff was palpable, and it was clear that Jack's presence was unsettling the balance of the dealership. He needed to address the mounting issues head-on. "We need to address this," Mark said decisively. "Jack, let's get to the bottom of these threats and see what we can do to protect you." Jack nodded, his expression a mix of relief and apprehension. "I appreciate it. I just want to get this resolved and focus on my work." As Mark and Jack delved into the situation, they discovered that the threats were not random. They were connected to the documents Jack had found, hinting at a network of individuals who had a vested interest in keeping the information hidden. The connections were murky, but the danger was real. Meanwhile, the atmosphere at the dealership grew increasingly strained. Employees whispered behind closed doors, their discontent simmering just below the surface. Mark's attempts to maintain a normal work environment were met with resistance. Sales numbers were slipping, and customer complaints began to surface. Mark called an emergency staff meeting, hoping to address the growing unrest. The room was filled with apprehensive faces as he took his place at the front. "I know there's been some tension recently," Mark began, trying to sound reassuring. "I want to assure you that we're handling the situation and working to ensure that everything remains professional." The staff's reactions ranged from skeptical to outright hostile. The underlying issues were clear. The discomfort with Jack's presence had become a source of division and uncertainty. "We need to support each other," Mark continued. "I'm committed to resolving the issues we're facing, but I need your cooperation and understanding." As the meeting concluded, Mark felt a wave of frustration. The dealership was on edge, and the challenges seemed to multiply with each passing day. The secrets Jack had uncovered were starting to take their toll, and Mark was caught in the crossfire. Back in his office, Mark sat at his desk, reviewing the documents once more. The threats, the staff unrest, and the deteriorating work environment all pointed to a larger, more complex problem. He realized that the stakes had risen significantly, and the resolution of the situation required more than just temporary fixes. The day wore on, and Mark's sense of urgency grew. He was determined to protect Jack, restore stability to the dealership, and uncover the full extent of the mystery behind the documents. Every decision felt crucial, every action laden with consequence. As evening approached, Mark reflected on the day's events. The challenges were daunting, but he was resolute in his commitment to seeing this through. The dealership was no longer just a business. It was a battleground of trust and resilience, and Mark was at the heart of it, fighting to maintain the delicate balance between his professional world and the personal revelations that had disrupted it. The road ahead was uncertain, but Mark knew that confronting the rising challenges was the only way to move forward. He prepared for another day of tough decisions and unexpected developments, aware that the journey was far from over. The dealership buzzed with an unusual energy as the sun rose higher in the sky. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface for days now seemed palpable, manifesting in every interaction and whispered conversation. Mark Winters walked through the showroom, his mind consumed by the urgent need to stabilize the crumbling environment around him. He spotted Linda at her desk, her usually bright demeanor overshadowed by worry. She was reviewing paperwork with a distracted air, and when Mark approached, she looked up with a strained smile. "Morning, Mark." "Linda, we need to talk," Mark said, his tone serious. "I need to address the staff's concerns and restore some order here. How are things on your end?" Linda sighed. "It's been rough. Employees are increasingly unhappy, and rumors are spreading. I've heard complaints about Jack, about you, about everything." Mark's expression tightened. "We need to resolve this. If we don't act fast, we risk losing control completely." Linda nodded, her eyes reflecting the same concern Mark felt. "I agree. Let's try to get everyone on the same page and clear up the misunderstandings." They decided to hold another meeting, this time focusing on open dialogue and addressing specific grievances. The staff gathered, their faces a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Mark took a deep breath and stepped up to speak. "I understand that there's been a lot of uncertainty lately," Mark began, trying to sound reassuring. "I want to be transparent about the situation and hear your concerns directly. We need to work together to navigate these challenges." As the meeting progressed, the air grew thick with unspoken frustrations. Employees voiced their discontent about Jack's presence and the rumors swirling around. Mark listened attentively, acknowledging their feelings, but also emphasizing the need for unity and professionalism. Jack stood at the back of the room, his face pale and strained. The staff's animosity was palpable, and the tension in the room seemed to heighten with each passing minute. Mark glanced at Jack, seeing the discomfort etched on his face. After the meeting, Mark sought out Jack, who was hunched over his workbench, his shoulders tense. "Jack, how are you holding up?" Mark asked, his voice laced with concern. Jack looked up, his eyes weary. "It's been tough. I feel like I'm a target, and the pressure is mounting. I didn't expect things to get this complicated." Mark placed a reassuring hand on Jack's shoulder. "We're in this together. I'll do everything I can to support you, but I need you to be upfront with me about anything you know. The more we understand, the better we can handle this." Jack nodded, his expression one of reluctant acceptance. "I appreciate it, Mark. I'll share everything I can." The days that followed were a blur of escalating tensions and mounting stress. Mark found himself juggling between managing the dealership's daily operations and dealing with the fallout from the revelations. His relationship with Linda, once a source of steady support, was now tested by the strain of the situation. One afternoon, Linda approached Mark with a pained expression. "Mark, we need to talk. There's something we haven't addressed yet: our relationship with the customers. The complaints have increased, and some are threatening to take their business elsewhere." Mark's face showed concern. "I didn't realize it was that serious. What can we do to address this?" Linda took a deep breath. "We need to be proactive. Maybe offer some sort of promotion or special event to regain customer trust and show them that we're addressing the internal issues." Mark considered Linda's suggestion, his mind racing with ideas. "That sounds like a good plan. Let's organize a customer appreciation event. We'll address their concerns and reinforce our commitment to them." As the event planning began, Mark and Linda worked closely together, their professional relationship tested but ultimately strengthened by their shared goal. The event became a focal point for the dealership's recovery, providing an opportunity to reconnect with the customers and showcase the dealership's dedication to improvement. Jack, too, was involved in the preparations, trying to stay focused despite the ongoing pressures. The event brought a semblance of normalcy and provided a platform to address customer concerns directly. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the tension that had characterized the dealership in recent weeks. As the event concluded, Mark felt a sense of cautious optimism. The customers were appreciative of the effort, and the staff seemed more united. The challenges were far from over, but the event had helped restore some degree of stability. Back at his desk, Mark reviewed the day's successes and setbacks. The journey had tested every relationship and pushed him to his limits. Yet, amidst the trials and tribulations, he had managed to keep the dealership afloat and support those around him. The road ahead remained uncertain, but Mark knew that confronting the tests of his relationships head-on was essential for moving forward. With renewed determination, he prepared for the next chapter in this evolving story, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The dealership's atmosphere had shifted subtly in the days following the customer appreciation event. Though the tension had eased somewhat, a pervasive unease lingered beneath the surface. Mark Winters had hoped the event would provide a fresh start, but the whispers of unrest had not fully dissipated. One crisp morning, as Mark was finishing his coffee and reviewing the day's schedule, Linda approached with a look of urgency. "Mark, there's something you need to see," she said, holding out a folder with a worried expression. "I think this is the turning point we've been waiting for." Mark took the folder and glanced at the cover. It was marked with a bold, red, "Confidential." He raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. "What's this about?" Linda's voice was low, her eyes scanning the room to ensure they weren't overheard. "I received this anonymously. It contains documents related to Jack's case and some new information that might be crucial." Mark flipped open the folder, revealing a series of documents and photographs. As he began to read, his eyes widened in disbelief. The papers detailed a complex web of connections between several influential figures and a series of shady deals. The photographs showed covert meetings and exchanges that suggested a deeper conspiracy. "This changes everything," Mark said, his voice steady but filled with concern. "If these documents are accurate, there's a much larger operation at play here." Linda nodded, her face reflecting the gravity of the situation. "We need to verify this information and determine how it impacts us. This could be the breakthrough we need, or it could be dangerous." Mark took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the new revelations. "We need to be cautious. If this is as significant as it seems, we could be stepping into something far bigger than we anticipated." Determined to get to the bottom of the new evidence, Mark arranged a secret meeting with Jack. They gathered in a secluded corner of the dealership, away from prying eyes and ears. Mark handed the documents to Jack, watching his reaction closely. Jack's face grew pale as he examined the contents. "I had no idea it was this extensive," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "This involves people I've only heard rumors about." Mark nodded. "We need to figure out our next steps carefully. We're dealing with a serious situation, and we must protect ourselves." As Jack and Mark discussed their options, Linda worked behind the scenes to discreetly investigate the credibility of the documents. She reached out to trusted contacts and conducted background checks to ensure that the information was legitimate. Her thoroughness and determination were evident in her meticulous approach. Meanwhile, the tension within the dealership continued to simmer. Employees whispered and exchanged uneasy glances, their distrust evident. The once familiar environment had become a place of suspicion and uncertainty. Mark's attempts to maintain morale were met with mixed results, and the strain was beginning to take its toll. That evening, Mark received a call from Linda. Her voice was tinged with urgency. "Mark, we've confirmed that the documents are authentic. The connections are real, and the implications are serious. We need to act quickly." Mark felt a surge of adrenaline. "What do you suggest?" Linda's voice was firm. "We need to confront the individuals involved and expose the conspiracy. But we must do so carefully. Any misstep could put us in grave danger." The next morning, Mark gathered Jack and Linda for a strategy meeting. They discussed their plan to expose the conspiracy while minimizing risk. They decided to leak the information to the media, hoping that public scrutiny would force the implicated parties to back down. As they prepared their strategy, the weight of the decision was palpable. The risks were significant, but the potential rewards, bringing the truth to light and resolving the issues plaguing the dealership, were worth it. In the midst of their planning, the dealership was abuzz with rumors about the upcoming changes. Employees sensed that something major was about to happen, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Mark looked around at his team, feeling a mix of determination and trepidation. The turning point had arrived, and the next steps would determine the outcome of their struggle. With a deep breath, he prepared to face the challenges ahead, knowing that the decisions made in the coming days would shape their future. As the day drew to a close, Mark and his team were poised on the brink of a critical moment. The turning point had been reached, and their actions would soon set in motion a series of events that would define their path forward. The stakes were high, and the outcome uncertain, but one thing was clear. The story was about to take a dramatic turn. The day had finally arrived. The crisp morning air seemed to hold its breath as Mark Winters prepared for what was arguably the most crucial moment of his journey. The dealership had been abuzz with speculation and nervous energy ever since the decision to go public with the conspiracy had been made. Now, Mark, Linda, and Jack were about to face the consequences head-on. Mark's office was a whirlwind of activity as final preparations were underway. Linda was on the phone with media contacts, her expression a mix of determination and apprehension. Jack paced back and forth, his nerves evident despite his attempts to appear calm. Mark, for his part, focused on gathering his thoughts and readying himself for the confrontation that lay ahead. "Everything's set," Linda said, hanging up the phone with a sigh of relief. "The press will be here soon. We need to be ready." Mark nodded, his jaw set with resolve. "We've prepared as much as we can. Now we need to stay focused and handle whatever comes our way." As the clock ticked down, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the dealership. Out stepped a group of well-dressed individuals, their faces a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Among them was Robert Gray, the prominent figure whose name had been linked to the conspiracy. His presence sent a ripple of tension through the already fraught atmosphere. Mark met Robert and his entourage at the entrance, extending a polite but firm handshake. "Mr. Gray, thank you for coming. We have important information to discuss." Robert's gaze was piercing, his demeanor calm but guarded. "I hope this isn't going to be another baseless accusation, Mr. Winters." Mark gestured towards a conference room, leading Robert and his team inside. Linda and Jack followed closely, their faces reflecting the seriousness of the moment. The room was set up with documents and a projector, ready to present the evidence they had collected. As the presentation began, Mark narrated the details of the conspiracy, the documents projected onto the screen for all to see. The room was silent except for the sound of Mark's voice, steady and resolute. "Here we have evidence of connections between several high-profile individuals and a series of illicit transactions," Mark said, pointing to the documents. "This is what we've uncovered." Robert's eyes narrowed as he scrutinized the evidence. "And you believe this will hold up in court? The burden of proof is on you, not us." Mark's response was calm but unwavering. "We verified the authenticity of these documents through multiple sources. We're confident in their validity." Robert's expression hardened. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Winters. There are powerful interests at stake here." The confrontation was heating up, and the tension in the room was almost palpable. Linda and Jack exchanged uneasy glances, their nerves frayed by the high-stakes encounter. Mark held his ground, determined to see this through to the end. "I'm aware of the risks," Mark said, his voice steady. "But the truth needs to come to light. This dealership and many others have been adversely affected by these actions." Robert's demeanor shifted, his confidence replaced by a hint of frustration. "You're making a mistake. This could have serious repercussions for you and your business." Before Mark could respond, one of Robert's associates, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire, spoke up. "Perhaps we should find a way to resolve this situation without escalating it further. A compromise might be in everyone's best interest." Mark looked at Claire, considering her words. "What kind of compromise are you suggesting?" Claire took a deep breath, "We're willing to discuss a settlement, but you must agree to certain conditions and retract your public statements." Mark's mind raced. A settlement could mean a quicker resolution, but it also meant potentially compromising his principles. He needed to weigh the options carefully. Linda leaned in, her voice low. "Mark, we have to be cautious. A settlement might be a temporary fix, but it could also mean we're not addressing the core issues." Jack, too, was visibly tense. "What if they try to sabotage us further if we don't take their offer?" Mark nodded, acknowledging the complexity of the situation. "I'll need time to consider this, but I won't back down from seeking justice." Robert's gaze was intense. "You have until the end of the day to make your decision. If you don't accept our terms, we'll be forced to take legal action." As Robert and his team left, Mark, Linda, and Jack were left to grapple with the gravity of the situation. The confrontation had been intense, and the conflict had reached a critical juncture. The stakes were higher than ever, and the decisions they made in the coming hours would shape their future. Mark took a deep breath, his mind racing with the implications of the confrontation. The pressure was immense, but he knew that the choices they made would define not just their immediate fate, but the long-term outcome of their fight for justice. As the day wore on, Mark and his team huddled together, preparing for the next steps. The confrontation had been a pivotal moment, and now they faced the challenge of navigating the conflict that lay ahead. With determination in their hearts, they prepared to tackle the difficult decisions and potential consequences that awaited them. The clock ticked relentlessly towards the end of the day, and the weight of Robert Gray's ultimatum pressed heavily on Mark Winters and his team. Each second seemed to stretch into eternity as they faced the critical decision that would determine the course of their fight for justice. In the conference room, Mark paced back and forth, the tension visible in his every movement. Linda and Jack sat at the table, their faces reflecting the strain of the decision at hand. The gravity of the situation was palpable, and the pressure to make the right choice was almost unbearable. Mark stopped pacing and looked at Linda and Jack. "We need to make a decision now. Do we accept the settlement offer, or do we risk everything to expose the truth?" Linda's voice was steady but tinged with worry. "A settlement might provide some immediate relief, but it could also mean that we're not addressing the core issues. We could end up right back where we started." Jack, his face etched with concern, added, "But if we refuse the offer, we could face severe legal repercussions. The stakes are incredibly high, and we need to consider the potential fallout." Mark took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind. "If we accept the settlement, we might be able to negotiate terms that still hold some weight. But if we reject it, we have to be prepared for the consequences. This could get messy." The minutes seemed to drag on as Mark weighed his options. The thought of compromising his principles was troubling, but the potential for long-term harm was equally daunting. He knew that whatever decision he made would have far-reaching implications, not just for himself, but for the entire dealership and everyone involved. Suddenly, Linda's phone buzzed with a message. She glanced at it and her eyes widened. "Mark, it's from one of our sources. They've uncovered new information that could change everything." Mark's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Linda read the message aloud, her voice trembling slightly. "The source has found evidence of additional illegal activities linked to Robert Gray and his associates. It's a detailed account of further corruption and financial misconduct." Jack leaned in, his expression shifting from concern to cautious optimism. "If this new evidence is credible, it could strengthen our position and expose the full extent of the wrongdoing." Mark's mind raced as he considered the implications of the new information. The possibility of a more comprehensive revelation could shift the balance in their favor, but it also meant that they would need to act quickly and strategically. "We need to verify this information immediately," Mark said, his voice filled with renewed determination. "If it's accurate, it could be the key to winning this battle." Linda nodded, already reaching out to her contacts for further verification. "I'll get on it right away. We need to ensure that this evidence is solid before we make any further moves." As Linda worked to validate the new evidence, Mark and Jack prepared for the potential fallout. The tension in the room was palpable, But there was also a flicker of hope that this new development could turn the tide in their favor. The day wore on, and Linda's updates came in with increasing frequency. Finally, she reported that the evidence had been confirmed as legitimate. Mark's resolve hardened as he prepared to confront Robert Gray once more. With the new evidence in hand, Mark called Robert's office to schedule an urgent meeting. The response was swift, and within hours, Robert and his team arrived at the dealership, their expressions guarded and anxious. In the conference room, Mark presented the new evidence, his voice steady and authoritative. "Mr. Gray, we've uncovered additional information that further implicates you and your associates in illegal activities. This evidence not only supports our claims, but also reveals the extent of the corruption." Robert's face turned pale as he reviewed the documents. The realization of the depth of their predicament was evident in his reaction. This is serious. I wasn't aware of these specific details." Mark's gaze was unwavering. "We're prepared to take this information public if necessary. However, we're also open to discussing a resolution that addresses the full scope of the wrongdoing." Robert took a deep breath, his composure faltering. "What do you want?" Mark's response was clear and firm. "We want accountability and a commitment to rectify the damage caused. We need assurances that these practices will end and that there will be restitution for those affected." The room fell into a heavy silence as Robert and his team considered the demands. The stakes were higher than ever, and the outcome of this meeting would determine the direction of their struggle for justice. As the meeting concluded, Mark, Linda, and Jack were left to contemplate the next steps. The decisive moments had arrived, and the decisions made now would shape their future and the resolution of the conflict that had engulfed them. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as they awaited Robert's response. The struggle for justice was far from over, but with the new evidence and the critical choices ahead, they were one step closer to achieving their goal. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden hue over the dealership as Mark Winters and his team prepared for what would be the final chapter in their intense battle for justice. The weight of the last few weeks had left its mark on everyone, but a palpable sense of resolution hung in the air. In the conference room, Mark sat at the head of the table, flanked by Linda and Jack. The new evidence had shaken the core of Robert Gray's operation, and the negotiation process had reached a crucial point. Today was the day they would either secure a resolution or face a new wave of challenges. Robert Gray and his team entered the room, their faces showing signs of exhaustion and defeat. The confident demeanor that had once marked their interactions had dissipated, replaced by a cautious weariness. They took their seats, and Mark could see the impact the evidence had made on them. "Mr. Winters," Robert began, his voice measured but tired, "we've reviewed the additional evidence you presented. It's undeniable that the corruption runs deeper than we initially thought." Mark nodded, his expression serious but hopeful. "We need to ensure that there is accountability and that steps are taken to rectify the harm caused. What can you offer in terms of restitution and reform?" Robert took a deep breath. "We're prepared to agree to a comprehensive settlement. This includes financial restitution to those affected, a commitment to reform business practices, and cooperation with ongoing investigations." Mark exchanged a glance with Linda and Jack, their faces reflecting a mix of relief and cautious optimism. "That's a significant step in the right direction. We'll need to formalize this agreement and ensure that it is implemented effectively." As the details of the settlement were hammered out, the tension in the room gradually eased. Mark and Robert negotiated the terms meticulously, ensuring that every aspect of the agreement was fair and transparent. It was clear that this resolution marked a turning point, not just for the dealership, but for everyone involved. Once the agreement was finalized, Mark, Linda, and Jack breathed a collective sigh of relief. The deal was signed, and the room, once filled with tension, now echoed with a sense of accomplishment. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The dealership began implementing new policies and procedures to ensure compliance with the agreement. The restitution payments were made, and the process of reforming business practices was set into motion. Mark stood in the dealership's showroom, watching as the team worked diligently. The sense of closure was bittersweet, but the transformation they had fought for was now becoming a reality. The dealership was not just recovering. It was evolving, stronger and more resilient than before. Linda approached Mark, her face reflecting both relief and determination. "We did it, Mark. It's not just about us. We've made a difference for everyone affected." Jack joined them, a thoughtful expression on his face. The journey wasn't easy, but it was worth it. "We faced enormous challenges and emerged on the other side." Mark nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "We fought for what was right, and we've set a precedent for accountability." It's a reminder of the power of perseverance and the importance of standing up for justice. As the dealership continued its recovery, Mark took a moment to reflect on the journey. The battle had been arduous, but it had also brought about meaningful change. The experience had tested their resolve, but it had also reaffirmed their commitment to integrity and fairness. In the quiet moments, Mark thought about the impact of their work. The resolution was a victory, but it was also a beginning, a chance to build a better future and to continue fighting for what was right. The journey had been transformative, and the lessons learned would guide them in the years to come. As the sun set over the dealership, casting long shadows across the showroom floor, Mark felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The resolution had been reached, but the journey was far from over. The commitment to justice and integrity would remain at the heart of their efforts, shaping their path forward. The story of their struggle was one of resilience and resolve, a testament to the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. And as Mark looked ahead, he knew that their efforts had made a lasting impact, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope and the possibility for change. Click on the video being recommended to you now.